There is a one rule that continues throughout every generation, and that is odd since humanity is about change. So, why does this one rule seem to never go away? And I want to explore that today. The Trinity Knot must have a beginning, and this is obscured with the mists of time. Or maybe not. After all, must it be historical to become learned behavior? Three religions are the basis of all we believe, and at the base of all three is a story of the first man. So, regardless of his existence, or if it's just a story, it is the beginning of the Trinity Knot. I'll allow others to argue over the rest. Humanity has a fatal disease called blame. It must be exposed to find the cure. So, let's start with what we are taught. Adam was the first man who was created by God. Then God created Eve from Adam. Both lived in the Garden of Eden, with only one rule. You must not eat of the tree of knowledge. Adam and Eve broke this rule, and when God approaches, it is Adam that says that Eve gave him the fruit. Apple is the label that we've given this. Thus, humanity created for the first time the first man threw the first woman under the figurative bus to avoid the full punishment for his own actions. He created a mist to hide from himself. The real problem was not the act, but his unwillingness to own that act. Eve does the same, but unlike Adam, has little time to prepare a believable lie, and worse, there is only two that could be blamed. She blames a snake. It sounds like two children in a family facing the parent. Jump forward to the family unit. A child's first decade is content to take instruction from the parents. Then age of possibilities. The child has more freedom, sees other families' way of behaving. They like it. But out of deference to the adults that have been around them from the beginning, they ask them why they do these things. How the adult handles this will set the stage for the puberty wars. It is not enough to be told right and wrong. They must now know this for themselves. They must defend it. Why? So they will own the words. You will be the first authority figures they must challenge. If you hope for them to stand alone in the world, carrying on after you are no longer there to protect them, this must be done. Yet, we have failed this over and over. Have you ever heard phrases like, "Because I said so"? Do as I tell you. I suggest if you've ever used those words, you've just lost the first battle in the puberty wars, and they haven't even started yet. Another leap. We've left the puberty wars. A new age dawns. Society declares arbitrarily a child is mature. We will call this the age of maturity, around 18 to 21. We don't completely allow them complete autonomy. And even when society does set this time, it does not mean the child will own it, or the adults in charge will respect the reason it is necessary. If a child avoids too much interference from the adults or peers around them, there is still a chance it could undo the damage that was imposed on it by society and family. This should be the age of knowing when you start to see this take place, but only if they learn how they can affect their own life. We should remember that the parents were damaged as well. This is a cumulative effect. A parent with empathy will attempt to limit the damage done to them, but we are human. If a child succeeds, it might seem unfair for an adult to take credit until you realize they are not taking credit for the child's success. They failed to see the damage they did. It's credit for what they were able to avoid doing to you. Avoid doing the mistakes their parents did to them. Only arrogant ignorance would assume the parent is unaware of their role in the child's hardships. Society tells us we must not communicate or show weakness. And this is true. But a child must have tools, must understand you see where you failed. Even with this knowledge, the fact is, the first priority of parents is to teach. If the adults have failed in the first decade and at age of possibilities to instill a moral code that the child can defend, that is their fault. And the adults should remember their own childhood during the puberty wars, how they reacted to dictatorial decrees from adults. I suspect this is something to do with learned behavior and language or perception as well. Something that has to do with seeing the child that triggers the mind to focus on only the parent's perspective. Something odd happens in those 9 months. At first, the parents insist they want a child to be happy and healthy. After birth, it changes. Now the child must destroy its happiness and health to make the parent happy. That must deal with the other 4 senses. Not hearing. Notice this is not something that a person without children has done. They will point out problems, and the parent's response is to dismiss this, saying the adult can't possibly know the burdens of parents until they have one. Arrogant ignorance is not real ignorance. It's a certainty in what they know that they will not consider someone else could have a piece they're missing. This is the first rule put in place by Adam when he created blame. It was a side effect, as we shall see. Society is the last line of defense. It must use the one-size-fits-all approach. No longer will the child have a compassionate authority figure that can consider individuals. They might end up in front of a judge who must impose a judgment. While compassion is laudable, it can become sickening if you fail to understand that unless the child learns consequences, can teach, you are only damaging the child further. Let me suggest the trinities that keep occurring could be a guide as well. Rigidity should be avoided. First, you can interfere and use talk, impose your own punishment. Second, only interfere if you hear from the child. It understands that what it did led to the effect. Third time, the child must experience the full punishment in total. Once this chance is missed, the child will have a rule in place that will be hard to challenge. It's placed it in the past. The soul lives in the future. It now is in mind's domain, and the mind must serve one master. It doesn't ask questions. At each step, it's been those closest that has failed the child. Notice the judge will ask the child if they understand what is going on. If the child is incapable of owning what they did, the punishment is more severe. Maybe financial or loss of freedom, but always the cost is real. Even then, the damage can continue. Listen to the words of a child. Have you never heard one use the argument, "It's so many years, but I was told it was likely to be only months"? Have you ever placed a punishment on a child and because it became inconvenient for yourself, you lifted the punishment early? If you thought before you acted, you should have realized that once a punishment is offered, you must follow through. This would have limited your possibilities of punishment or forced you to put an expiration date on them at the time you announced the punishment. We think to do this is to give them too much information, so we don't do it. Also, do you have rules and not a one-size-fits-all answer to discipline? Did they face a judge with less compassion than society's judge? Or one that attempted to break the child's free will, demanding they stop thinking, do only as told? Now, those words have context. Hear those words, you should realize you have a problem. They've added to the initial flaw of Adam. Not only had they learned the art of blame that every religion champions, but They understand all they must do is outlast the authority figures, and they receive less punishment. What a wise person would see as a loss, they have learned to see as a win. How do you get them to understand an age of maturity unless society will not offer less time for good behavior? But once again, the adults will fail. How dare we be so cruel? That rule is in place along with so many others, yet not all, even in the same families, learn the same patterns of behavior. Why is this? The child has a role to play, and I suggest it could be decisive. Again, the parents can help or damage this role, but it is the child that makes the choice. It takes place long before age of possibilities. I believe two people will shape what I call language of perception. The human trinity, mind, body, soul. While the body represents the defining event in the child's life that they must overcome, the mind and soul must choose a person to emulate. Some might assume it is the parents or adults that raise them. This was not true for me, and understand that they have different criterion for choosing. Free will is creativity. Both are soul. Unrestrained free will is arrogant, and soul has never wanted to stop itself from doing what it wants. I suspect its choice will be grandparents, parents, siblings, or close family friends. Maybe extended family, depending on how much access they have. It will choose selfishly and possibly unwisely. It likely will choose before age of possibilities. However, I suspect that's not always the case. It would be a more chaotic choice, and it could change in midstream. This is a force of nature that will act first until humility is instilled to teach it the value in self-control, what humility can teach. No one else can reach the soul in the way the mind can and must. It needs the information. When it asks why, it is imperative it gets the answers as quick as possible. The mind chooses based on what it needs. It knows the soul's nature, but it must choose from those the adults provide before the soul reaches age of possibilities. It must be prepared to stand up to the soul. That will not listen at first. A best for it would be one that is good at problem solving, communication, analysis of a problem, compassion, and most important, the ability to adapt. This likely will be within the family, but not necessarily. This could include the parents, grandparents, or close friends. I do not believe it will choose a sibling. It needs someone that will help it. A sibling is not going to help in its role. In my case, while the choice was not compassionate, it had the rest. My choice was the one that damaged the person that caused the trauma in my life. It was the soul's choice that united both empathy and strength of will to allow the mind an ally. Made my soul less rebellious. Only this made the difference. Who they chose will decide who gains control and just how dynamic the child is at problem solving. The mind is limited to whom parents allow to be around them. And above all else, until it succeeds in teaching humility, it will be overruled by the soul. It gets to argue, but the soul oversees its destiny. The mind must be dynamic in its argument, and unlike a parent or adult around the child, it must understand the need to earn the child's respect. I mentioned the body. It is at the mercy of whim. It will not have a choice. While a person will inflict the trauma, it will not be the person, but the event that will create fear that both soul and mind must overcome. Ever heard of the reference, the body of the question? Understand, I am not saying the trauma is catastrophic. It could be someone overprotective that uses verbal punishment to destroy both the mind and soul's ability to overcome adversity. Make them fear asking questions. I suspect the trauma will define the parameters of the child's world, a rule of sorts that must be removed also. Until the child realizes this trauma has words attached that have more power than anything else in a child's life, it will be lost in illusion. The trauma will create a need to live up to the words. If you don't, anxiety will increase. While you could overcome it occasionally, it will always kick in, and when you're interacting with others, it will not easy to be challenged. This could make you fear interacting with others. After all, you're fundamentally who you are. The trauma will be something that imposes rules on you and that is demanding you reject some aspect of you. Possibly everything the soul is. It's a twist, putting the worst possible definition on what the soul fears it might be. These three things will heavily impact the child's future, and none of it must be the adults in charge. It just doesn't have to be them. The adults do have a point when they tell the child, you blaming them for the past doesn't change the reality after becoming adults. It is your decisions that are keeping you from having a better life. Your soul is who you are. What the mind needs is to emphasize the aspects of the person that has aspects the soul hates. The soul sees something it likes, wants to do this. The mind must argue why that path is not the best one. It would be best to use the anti-role model. Allow the soul to shape its own unique path. The mind and the adults only need to show it the reasons why it shouldn't choose the harmful paths. Another thing the child must know, and as soon as possible, those around them, being human, will fail. They must own their mistakes, admit when they did something they are ashamed of, something that is in violation of everything society teaches parents. It's assumed that the child must not see weakness. It is not a true war. You need the mind's respect during the puberty wars, not its ambivalence or animosity. There is truth in divide and conquer. The mind is the natural ally of the adults around the child, but it must have the ability to counter the willful nature of the soul. It can't do that when the child's only focus is on doing all it wants. The soul is in charge. If the mind can't counter the arguments, the soul will do as it pleases. The rules in the mind will further damage its ability to function. Once the soul starts imposing its own rules, the soul will forget those and will not easily discover those, while the mind can't bring it up since the soul has already put the rule in place. I don't want to know. Look at parents that fight in front of the child. I suggest this is a point that the parents fail to create a unified language of perception. That is what a family unit must do. They are attempting to create a unified language out of two separate languages. The child needs structure. If it sees disagreement, then it will seek answers of the mind on how to manipulate. This will be more apparent if the family has more than one child. It is not by accident that parents that lose one child into the system of society implores another not to go down that path. I've talked of language of perception, something you should realize. Those that translate one language into another understand this. Some languages have words that is broad, while another could have more than one word to say the same thing. When they translate, they must attempt to pick out the nuance, to pick the best word that will convey what is meant to the other. Same is true with language of perception. Some words will have more emotional impact, while to the other it means nothing more than a phrase. It could cause a reaction. Therefore, the mind must know when the adults have made a mistake. It has to translate this to counter the soul's arguments later when it wants to do something. It will point out, well, they did this then, why can't I do this now? It must know and be able to point to the actions taken of the person owning that mistake. The mind is the one that holds knowledge. Its domain is the past. That is the seeds of wisdom the soul must learn. What is said at the time of a child starting down the same path as the first child is, don't make the same mistakes the first child did. Do you know what the child will translate the words mistake into? Remember Adam and Eve? The first human creation? Concept of blame. God attempted to teach cause and effect. It was Adam that discarded cause and embraced blame. A child that has chosen the eldest sibling as the soul's guide has done this because it saw the child manipulating others, and often won. What is missed? The connection between the actions back then that leads to today's consequences. It could be the child will see the real mistake was in getting caught. I can't say that is the case, or even that any of this is well thought out as far as the child is concerned. We are a force of nature, but fundamentally, the learned behavior seems to clearly show if a child is focused on the least worst outcome, and when they get out of jail, go back to doing all they did before, it likely is because they do not see the connection between that behavior and the damage inflicted. I think there is a reason that police and teachers and other authority figures, including morality, is being tossed away by the young today. They see hypocrisy being done that has damaged them and many others. But they fail to understand we never taught them to think before they act of the consequences. They see themselves at the mercy of their carnal nature. Adults, society. They have no role to play. Is there any wonder you see mass shootings taking place even in schools? They feel no control over their lives. They want that control. And one thing they do know, God is the ultimate authority. They've been told that He decides who lives and dies. That is the point behind the words. Why does God let bad things happen? It was first used when natural disasters hit. It is the only rule that is never discarded, but imposed on a child. It is a trauma-induced event. The answer was always, God is a punishing God because of Adam and Eve. No, He never was. God doesn't punish, He teaches. We turn it into punishment if we fail to learn the cause of why we are getting punished, just as a parent must show the same thing. Adam failed, and we are failing our children with the same rule. In humility, it can overcome both the mind and body. Remember, the body is the trauma that causes the fear. The mind is where the words take seed. In seeing the pain in the eyes of others, it can refuse, the soul can, to do things that it wants, giving it self-control. Or realize that sacrifice is required and go beyond what's necessary because it will not see damage done to someone else that was done to them. God does show us what is right and wrong. We get to choose the action, including if we don't do anything at all. Fear of the remembered pain of the body and mind's words that have become a rule magnified and triggered by the body's fear must be ruled by the soul. Remember, mind and body serve the soul ultimately, even if the mind controls most of the body. This is key if the child is to progress and ever succeed in removing the first rule. The origin of blame. Language or perception is the soul's only way to perceive the world. The mind only answers questions. Its sole purpose is to advise. Those rules the soul places can limit the amount of information the mind gives the soul. If the soul fears and desires the time when possibilities were not known, before age 10, then it could place in the mind the rule to only give it limited options. In fear and trauma, after the parents depart, then society must become the parent. Too many are living in the past. They remember the age before possibilities and want to return to that time. I know. I suffer PTSD. The chaos of all that emotions made me attempt this. Problem, the mind had parents to keep the soul safe during that time. I had someone that made me feel safe enough to deal with the trauma. Then while I was awash in all the chaos, I relied on him to keep an eye on things that were going on around me. This was unwise of me. Only parents can offer unconditional love. It cost me a decade of turmoil to learn this. The soul must understand. Society can't offer the mind the same individual attention it would have to have. Society will have one-size-fits-all answers, and not every soul will live in the past. Society in those times will demand the soul break, but not all will. War and chaos are inevitable. We are at a time like this. God must teach humility again, and it must be a trauma big enough to overcome the damage of adults that have long since departed. When this is done, there will be only one rule that has not been removed, and it must be discarded. But God didn't create it. The first human did. The need to blame someone else for why bad things happened. I started with Adam and Eve. Let's end it with an analysis of what the punishment was. What we know of the story. Adam blames Eve, who blames the snake. Likely Adam and Eve decided to do this together, but Adam panicked and wanted to limit his guilt. Eve only reacted without thought and chose something nearby to blame. I say this because it's what two children would do that didn't know any better. Even the most benevolent of parents is imposing and sets limits on behavior, something no soul will ever like. So God has listened to the two excuses. That's what they were. The truth was very simple. God told them not to do it. It was his home. Out of respect for him, they should have refused. It doesn't matter if they did it because someone encouraged them. Ever hear the phrase, if someone told you to jump off a cliff, would you? Funny how even though the story of Adam is showing the opposite, the parents are still teaching the right thing. Even though they blindly insist, this story shows Adam as someone to emulate. Lessons are taught. These are automatic responses, instinctual. We just fail to understand that this story is offering the opposite view, confusing any child with conflicting messages. God wants followers. Every person tells us this, every adult. Even those that insist we give up what he gave us. I suspect this was a test. Remember Age of Possibilities. The fruit was knowledge. It's implied that it was the knowledge of good and evil. I disagree, but we will go with that. The punishments are much the same as what a parent would give out. The snake was just an innocent bystander. His punishment was nothing. He was always a snake. He already slithered on the ground. His punishment was not one given by God. What was God's words to the serpent? Eve's seed will blame the snake. The odd thing about blame, even if it fails to get you out of punishment, the one that used the blame will still embrace the falsehood, telling all that it was that person's fault, until in its mind it becomes fact. So, we come to Eve's punishment. Again, she is a woman. Her punishment also falls in line with what was already a fact. She would give birth. However, one might say that she had help in God's garden to limit the pain. It was banishment from eating that he was referring to. No real punishment at all. Only Adam receives punishment. Once he lived in comfort in the garden, all his needs taken care of, just like a child before Age of Possibilities. When rules are challenged, he must now work to provide food for Eve and a family. It was not punishment for eating of the fruit, but the reality that the first thing Adam did with it was to create blame. The last verses are very telling. It implies that God was concerned. If they remained, Adam would eat of the tree of life. This is perceived as unfair. However, what was the fruit? Knowledge of good and evil. The origin of all evil is us, and it's our knowledge of death that makes us do all of this. The fear of pain, suffering, but all of it is tied to our own mortality. Adam already created blame. Until that is removed, he can't have eternal life. It's mentioned that God is withdrawn. That was not punishment. It wasn't an act of God. God knew what Adam and Eve didn't. The blame had a side effect. It created good and bad. The soul was split in language of perception. It would only get worse. It was a contagion. Remember, in religion, there is a group called angels. They must not be infected with this contagion. They created the rift. God has been said to want us back. That's the hope that we all have. Listen to the words we say without thinking. Creativity is always good in our perception. However, free will is often seen as bad. We own it only when it refers to us. In others, it must be crushed. This is what society and parents are attempting to do. Creativity and free will is the soul, but the soul must learn that damage to one of us will damage the rest, and us as well. We spend all our time trying to commit suicide. What did God say to the serpent? Eve's seed will blame the snake. What has humanity done ever since? Isn't it true that women have been blamed for the original sin? Forgetting words mean little, the best lessons, the ones that last longest, are the ones that teach humility. The consequences that everyone says today is punishment. This is the basis for the Trinity Knot. The question I can't answer. Is this planned by God, or did humanity do this to itself? This we are not going to learn. Any attempt to fix this on the societal level will fail. It is the past. And there are only two possibilities the past can teach. Predator or victim. The only possible answer is humility. That is the creation of the strong soul. We can start with our children. It started with one man and one woman. The serpent was a sideline to a story that always held the seeds. But you must use creativity to understand. We are telling kids all the right things, yet champion the man that created the first blame, that laid it at Eve's feet, and wonder why the children are not listening to us. We tell them so much and do the opposite. Blame them for not overcoming what was done to them. But we never gave them the tools to know how. We just tell them, do as I say. And then when they fail to challenge others, we disagree and get angry at their weakness.